okay.
We're good. You're good. What's up, East of the Bend listeners? Hopefully we have some hangovers from our first show with Coach Ryan Aiello. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that. Let me just, as usual, I'll refresh here and make sure everything's on the status quo. Got a good show planned for you. I've always wanted to do one of these crossover shows, so we'll talk about what that is here in just a little bit. I'm sure the description should tell you what it is. Look at that, live now. Perfect. Get everything set up to record here. Appreciate everybody coming in with us. Hopefully it's funny, our secondary podcast is more popular than our primary one. I don't know how that's working, but...
Case Keenum.
My dude. There we go.
Oh, that hurts.
What is up, East of the Bend listeners? This is your host, Greg Schaefer. I got my co-host here, Will Havanis. As always, what up, dude?
What up?
We're pulling the double duty with our hurry-up offense today. It's Will's daughter's birthday, so we're going to try to get him out of here, even though we already done one show. We did Ryan Aiello's post-game show. So if you're interested in that, high school football at all, Ryan's a really good dude. Yeah, check him out. If you're not even from the area, I know a lot of the listeners that listen to this show, a lot of you guys aren't in Central Ohio. North Catholic's a powerhouse and struggling right now at 1-2, but very close games, and Ryan's a really good guy. Before we get going too much further here, our show is brought to you by Dempsey's Food and Spirits, downtown Columbus at 346 South High Street. It's where the Notre Dame alumni group, the fan club, has all their game watch parties and amazing food, too. Food and drink specials all season on Saturdays and free parking. This show is the official podcast of the Notre Dame Fan Club of Columbus. Mark Hassam is the founder of that club. We had him on last week during that show that will forever remain a dark show. That was actually episode 38, and nobody could hardly hear it unless you were in the place, and then nobody cared, it seemed like. So, yeah, I take full responsibility for that. I know there's a lot of people that tried to watch online, and I took a chance. It's not something I normally do with the show, so I definitely apologize for that. I don't take chances with this show. I really don't. I usually always go with the sure thing. The guy we cross-promote with, we are in association with, DJ Digital Input, Kent Price. We did a run-through with his equipment. When that didn't work out, or it did work out, it worked fine. We did a show in the backyard. At lunch, found out that Dempsey's had sound out to the patio, had sound in the back, and my eyes got real big, and I said, I'm going to go ahead and throw that bomb to that wide receiver down the middle as opposed to just taking my first down here. And, it sounded okay. It created a lot of feedback and things like that. But the next go-around, I think it'll turn out a lot better now that I know that it just wasn't going to work out, and their soundboard isn't as powerful as what I had. So should have just used what I had. I screwed it up. So this is actually episode 38. This is going to be a fun one. As I said, it's a crossover episode. What this is we're going to bring in Chris Lee from VandySports.com. As you guys know, Notre Dame still undefeated, by the way. I think after that felt like a loss. Our admin Kyle Davis from Cincinnati. It's kind of poetic that sounded like Jason Voorhees right there too. Yeah. But our admin down in Cincinnati, Kyle Davis, even mentioned, he's like, that felt like a loss. I said, that's getting posted. I was like, that's going on Twitter and Facebook. That's getting posted. So the crossover episode is we're bringing in Chris Lee from VandySports.com. Chris is the end-all, be-all, knows everything there is to know about Vandy sports. In appreciation for Chris coming on the show, we actually bought a Vandy mini helmet, which is sweet, by the way.
Yeah, dude, that helmet is sweet.
Isn't that awesome? That matte finish and the anchor down the back, that is really cool. I hope they wear that in South Bend next week. I will actually be in South Bend next week for the game, so I'm pretty pumped about that. I'm going to try to meet up with everybody that's been on the show thus far. And, it's really cool just to get to meet the people that have been on the show and really helped us build this brand up. So, so Chris is going to come in. They're 2-0 right now. You can check him out at VandySports.com is that on what he's at on Twitter. And I know he has his own personal Twitter page. Let me look that up just real fast before we get rocking here and call him back. But he doesn't really use it too much, but I'll throw that out there for him. Just, again, out of appreciation. He's been extremely nice and just super willing to come on. I know he hosts 2 podcasts. He does the VandySports.com podcast, which is it's affiliated with the Rivals website, if you're familiar with the recruiting website Rivals. And he does the Ultimate SEC Show podcast, so that's cool. He does double duty like me and you will, so we can learn something.
Yeah.
So with that being said, let's give Chris a call back here. Let me grab my notes so I act like I know what I'm talking about.
I'm gonna put this public right now. This Vandy helmet is sweet, and it's so sick that if they continue to wear it and they start winning and go undefeated, I'm a fan.
Yeah. Like I said, I was looking to do this show, and actually Will, he's co-host. He's, one of the biggest backbones of this show, but he didn't even know, how'd you get hooked up doing this one? And I was like, well, let me just tell you. I was going down the schedule, and I've always had a lot of respect for Vanderbilt, the way they do things and things like that. And, kids actually go to class, shocking. And, you got to be pretty freaking intelligent to get in there. High standards. And then
So how'd Jay Cutler get in?
Right? Blows my mind. Maybe Chris can give us some insight toward the end of the show with him. So let's give Chris a call back. He is on his way home from somewhere. I'm not sure where, but he's got his kids with him. And he's still willing to come on, which is pretty awesome.
Better man than me.
This is Chris.
Hey, Chris. This is Greg Schaefer again, East of the Bend podcast. You're live with us. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, man.
Are you on like the car phone? Or
you're in luck. We were pulling into our driveway in about 60 seconds.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say, hey kids, make a lot of noise.
Oh, that's funny. So we were just out of appreciation. I don't know if you've seen the tweet, but out of appreciation for you coming on the show, I actually bought a Vanderbilt mini helmet, and we're over here marveling over it because it's the matte finish with the anchor down the back, and that's a beautiful helmet.
I didn't even know that they made those. The weird thing is, like, their helmet that you see everywhere is one that I bet they haven't even used in a year or two, like the gold one with the Star V.
Yeah.
I don't even know how many helmet and uniform combinations they have. But it's a bunch.
Yeah, that one in particular, we were just looking at it, and that matte finish, that's really nice, and we love that anchor down the back. That's very cool.
That one is pretty cool. I'm not a big fan of some of their looks, but I think that one's pretty neat. So.
Yeah, so Chris, tell us. I was trying to set you up a little bit in our intro. Tell us, how long have you covered Vanderbilt then?
I'm sorry, hang on a second. What did you say?
I was trying to set you up a little bit before I called you back, but I said about 20-plus years. How long have you actually covered Vanderbilt?
03.
03, okay. So almost 20 years then. Very cool. Very cool. So we'll get right to it here. I know you're just getting home, but, I actually love Derek Mason. I'm a huge fan of Derek Mason. But he had a step back last season, going 5-7. Is his seat getting warmer down there, or how are the fans of Nashville feeling about Derek right now?
It's hard to say because it's a weird situation with their athletic department. They've sort of made headlines for their lack of commitment to sports. The AD, everybody has thought was going to retire this year, but everybody's thought that for 2 or 3 years. He is certainly not quick on the trigger with coaches, and it's a hard job, and he's very well liked. But at the same time, you got to do better than 6-26 in 2 SEC seasons. And this time a year ago, I think they'd won 6 out of 7 games. They'd beaten Ole Miss and beaten Tennessee to close the season before, and 3 weeks in, they were number 1 in the country in scoring and total defense, and then it fell apart. I think another season like last, and that would probably be it for him. But at the same time, they've played well to start this season, and now you just kind of wonder, where is this headed? So, I look, if Derek Mason has a winning season, I think that question answers itself. But, another season where it goes like it did in the second half of last year, and it's just it's really tough to sell to the fan base at that point.
Yeah, that was one of the things that actually we were talking about which crossover show we would reach or who we'd reach out to do a crossover show like this. And not only my respect for Vanderbilt, but Derek Mason, he almost reminds me of a little more intense PJ Fleck, like a PJ Fleck of the South almost. He's a young guy. He really seems to speak well to the kids. He kind of identifies with that generation pretty well. So I really I like him a lot. I wish him a lot of success. Hopefully he can keep it rolling.
I don't know. I would say probably this. The next bad word that I hear about Derek as a human being is the first. He is pretty much universally loved by everyone. We've been in this business long enough. We've dealt with coaches that we really like personally, and we've dealt with some jerks if you've done it long enough. And Derek is really at the top of the list of quality human beings. And I think a lot of people hope that it goes well for him just because you want to see good people do well. And I think everybody just really likes Derek.
Mm-hmm. So Vandy has started off 2-0 this year. Is that kind of surprising for you, considering that they've lost 7 of their starters on D?
No, it's not surprising at all. I said before the season, you can just go ahead and basically chalk up 2 wins. I know they were only, I think, a 3-point favorite over Middle Tennessee State, which was, I'm not a betting person, but if I were, I would have put money all over that game. That was just a dumb line. If you had seen those 2 teams play the last couple of years, Vanderbilt physically dominated them. And Nevada, the same thing. I mean, the line was 10. That one I wasn't as sure about, but they just seem to do well against teams that they're not athletically overmatched by. They've got some playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, and Charles Wright. Juwan Williams is a really good corner, probably going to be playing in the NFL maybe this time next year or a year early. So it's not like they don't have some pieces. It just they had some glaring weak spots at a few places on defense, and I was not surprised at all to see them win the first 2, but I think the next 2 are going to be a really good bellwether for where the season heads.
Yeah, it's really impressive what you guys have done, especially on defense. I mean, it's that Stocksdale kid from Middle Tennessee. I mean, he puts up numbers, and you guys held him in check pretty well. And, only giving up 7 points to a relatively high-powered offense. Do you think a lot of that was from the familiarity? You guys have played each other several times over the last few years, correct?
Yeah, they played 4 times in 4 years, and I don't know, for whatever reason, they just match up well with them. I think that the stat was something like Middle scored 4 or 5 offensive touchdowns against Vanderbilt in 4 years. And I think it scored like 14 or 15 against the other Power 5 teams that had played in that span. I think it was an equal number of games, too. So I can't really explain why it is that they match up really well with Middle, but they have just completely shut them down. And, I mean, and that's a team that has done well and moved the ball against some other Power 5 schools. And I know they won a shootout at Missouri a couple years back, but for whatever reason, they just have they didn't move the ball against Vanderbilt, and to be honest, it just wasn't pretty most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I listened to your post-game show after the Middle win, and you personally didn't seem like you were real impressed with the first half of that game, or in fact, to me, it kind of didn't seem like you were impressed with the win overall, despite the fact that it was a 35-7 victory. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was. I liked the win. It kind of grew on me. I don't like when they get really conservative in terms of play calling, because I think it's a habit for them. I think that they have got more weapons on offense than you might realize when you just look at the stat sheet, having seen practices and knowing what some of these kids can do individually. I think they get really conservative at times. The Middle win, I think the more that I digested it, look, you win a game 35-7 that you're a 3-point favorite, and I really don't care how you've done it. That's a pretty good day. And to follow it up, they had a pretty good performance against Nevada. And you say what you want about Nevada, that's the lowest point total in yardage total that Nevada's had since week 4 last year. So my flaws really were in how they call games. I think they get convinced at times that they are we're going to smash you between the tackles run team. I just don't know, although they're better running the ball, that's what they are. When they've got kids like Jared Pinkney, who's a really good tight end, Kalijah Lipscomb, who I think is probably one of the most underrated players in the country at receiver. I don't understand at times why they don't use those guys a little more than they do. Their starting running back is Corey Blasingame. who out of the 4 kids that can play for them is probably the least explosive of the 4. So it wasn't so much that I was not impressed with the win. I look at this sometimes and I feel like they leave a little bit of meat on the bone. But on the other hand, look, they beat those 2 teams pretty easily. There's probably some things that you don't want to show with South Carolina and Notre Dame on the horizon. So I guess I'm kind of taking a wait and see to that is, do they open it up? They're going to have to make some more plays and take some more chances against those teams, and they did. But I would give them an A so far. But there is that little nagging doubt of, are they going to revert to their habits of kind of conservatism when I think they've got the potential to do more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we can speak to it as of yesterday. I mean, a 24-16 win over just Ball State, and that was ugly. And I would say, I'd venture to say Nevada and Middle Tennessee are far beyond better than Ball State. So I think you guys are definitely jumping out of the gate well. And now, speaking of jumping out of the gate well, you guys have kind of done this, and it happened last year as well. You jump out 2-0. Were you guys 3-0 before Bama? Was that right?
It was 3-0. And they led the country in total defense and scoring defense. And then Alabama beat them 59-0. And, man, the yardage was, I think it was 600, something along those lines. It was just one of those games that it was every bit as ugly as the box score would have said it was.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think has to happen for Vandy to avoid another one of those, nosedives? I mean, you start the season 3-0, you're thinking it's at least a guaranteed bowl game. What do you think has to happen to keep these guys rolling this year?
The explanation from last year was that Alabama did a lot to kill their confidence, which no argument from me. They say that one thing that they did wrong was they practiced those guys too hard after that, and it just made the issues worse. So we'll see. If they go into South Bend and get smacked, then I guess South Carolina is a pretty good litmus test the next week. But my concern is I still think there's some holes on defense. And as we found out after 3 weeks last year, that the teams that they played leading into that just didn't have – and although one of them was Kansas State, so that was a good performance in that one too, but I don't think that they had some of the guys that Alabama and Georgia had and that could do some things like those teams did. So my thing is I want to see how they do against a truly big physical offensive line, against a team that can run the ball, because I'm worried about them along the defensive front, that they won't be able to stop that. I'm still not convinced, although they played pretty well, that the corner slot opposite of Juwan Williams, I think that's potentially a concern. Donovan Sheffield has started there the first 2 games and played really well, but he didn't start a game till he was a senior and didn't contribute a ton. He played some, but not a lot. And I didn't think safety was a really good area for them. Darius Wiley's good, but the other one, Zaire Jones, I didn't think I had a good fall or spring. Then he got suspended, and so then you start to worry about depth. But Frank Hoppett's done pretty well. But really, I want to see Notre Dame is despite what happened yesterday, is a much better team than what they've faced so far. It's a team that's going to have athletes that they haven't faced this year. And when they face really good athletes and really big physical teams, that's when it fell apart on them a year ago. And I want to see this year, how are they able to handle those same challenges? It may not be exactly what Georgia and Alabama had, but in terms of athletes that everybody wanted, I know that Notre Dame's got plenty of those. And it's just, that's where it fell apart for them this year. And I think that's where they've got to make sure, that's where it fell apart for them last year. That's where they've got to make sure it doesn't do that this year.
So on the offensive side, Ralph Webb left, or he's gone, and he had almost 5,000 total yards from scrimmage and 35 touchdowns in his career. How does Vandy go about filling that hole?
The crazy thing is I think they're going to be a much better running team this year. As good of a career as he had, I think he got worn out. I think he played hurt a lot. You look at his yards per carry, I think it was right around 4, maybe even a little bit under, and a lot of that got padded by playing a Tennessee team that I think had kind of thrown in the towel in the last game. They've got a kid named Keyshawn Vaughn, who played at Illinois, who's really gifted, had a 46-yard touchdown run or something like that yesterday. He's their most explosive option. He can run inside. He can run outside. He can break tackles. He can run around you or over you. He can catch a few passes. I think the concern with him may be pass blocking and things like that. And I think that's why they start Kari Blasingame, who's probably the least exciting of those options, but probably does a lot of things that coaches like that we don't maybe notice when we're watching games. They've got a kid named Jamari Wakefield who's kind of between the two, but a little bit more like Vaughn, had a really good opener. And I think they're better blocking this year. I think that moving Bruno Reagan back to the right side after he played safety last year, that kid is going to be a guard who plays in the NFL, I think, for a long time. And I think that they've got the potential to be a good run right team. They really weren't on Saturday, and I think that Devin Cochran, their right tackle, got hurt maybe the second quarter or so in that game. But I think he's going to be back. He didn't play great on Saturday, but maybe that was an injury situation. We'll wait and see. But I think that between having backs that weren't just beat up like Ralph was a year ago, and maybe you've got a gear that Ralph, to be honest, as good as he was, never had, and a more cohesive and experienced offensive line, I think that they'll be a better running team this year than they were last year, and certainly have been so far.
Yeah, that Vaughn, he's a nice running back. I watched the whole game yesterday, and most of it yesterday, and I finished it up today. And that run he had, he said it was about 46 yards, and man, that was a thing of beauty. He can definitely give some teams some fits this year. With your quarterback, Kyle Shermer, he's been there forever. He's going to go down as probably one of the best Vandy quarterbacks of all time, especially statistically. What intangibles do you think makes him so effective?
Well, his dad is the coach of the New York Giants, so he's grown up around football. His grandfather was an NFL coach, and he was throwing passes with NFL quarterbacks when he was in elementary school. And so when you're around football that long and come from a family that knows it as well as the Shermers do, that's a big check mark in your corner. He's not really mobile, and he's gotten in a little bit of a habit of throwing some balls up for grabs between camp and even one we saw yesterday. But he's got a pretty good arm. He will struggle with accuracy at times, but they protect him okay. It's not a great pass-blocking offensive line, but it's an okay one. And they've got a left tackle in Justin School who's been pretty good in that area. I think that he's got some kids in Pinckney and Lipscomb who can make some plays for him. And, he's really good when they go tempo. They just never do it unless they just have to. Mm-hmm. But I think he's a gifted guy. He's not going to beat you with his feet. He will occasionally make a mistake and throw a bad ball, and he will go through little spells where he struggles with his accuracy. But for the most part, he's a really good quarterback, and a lot of those records that Jay Cutler holds may end up in Kyle Shermer's hands by the time this season's over.
Yeah, one of the things that it torched us yesterday was just this Riley Neal, who actually has some pro prospects out of Ball State. He's being looked at by the NFL a little bit with his intangibles, but he kind of killed us on the short passing game. And when I was kind of comparing the game and looking at you guys, I think that's something that Kyle can really take advantage of, is that short passing game.
Yeah, I don't know sometimes if they throw enough slants. He's pretty decent at throwing that pass. They've got some kids that you haven't seen much. They've got a freshman named Cam Johnson out of Brentwood Academy, which is a powerhouse team that's here locally. And Cam can really be dynamic with the ball in his hands. I wonder if they get him a little bit more involved. I think Pinckney and Lipscomb are both going to get a shot to play in the league. Elijah Lipscomb is just really, really explosive with the ball in his hands and a good deep threat. They've got more players than most Vanderbilt offenses usually do. Probably the throw they'd like to make the most, or they make the most, of the ones kind of a lot of times across the field to the hash marks that he's okay with. And he's actually pretty good at throwing the deep ball too. I don't know what their plan of attack is, but I do think they're going to have to open it up a little bit more. And I'm really anxious to see what they can do against that defense, because obviously it's going to be way more of a challenge than what they had in week 1 and week 2.
Mm-hmm. So who do you think is going to give Notre Dame fits on the offense? Who are the weapons that you can't wait to see them go up against Notre Dame?
I really want to see what Elijah Lipscomb can do. because that kid, as I've said, is a very, very good receiver. I know Notre Dame's got some defensive backs who are excellent as well. Kind of who wins that one, and I want to see who they line up on Pinckney, because he's a 6'3", 6'4", 255-pound tight end who can really run. He'll make some mistakes. He'll drop some balls, but when he gets the ball in his hands in the open field, he's not a guy that you really want to try to bring down. So I think those two kids, and maybe seeing if Vaughn can follow up on what he did in week one, because he's a kid with some ability. They haven't quite turned him loose to the extent that I would like to see him turn loose. And Notre Dame will be a great test with the kids they've got in the trenches.
So, Chris, between both games, the defense hasn't given up a second-half point yet. What do you think that is? What's making the team so strong in the second half this year?
That's a really good question. I think that they've got an outstanding defensive coordinator in Jason Tarver, who came over from the Oakland Raiders, where he was the defensive coordinator there, and they've been a lot more aggressive, although they haven't had to be as aggressive because they've been able to get a decent pass rush with 4 and 5 guys. But I think he's shown some willingness to really send extra guys to get after it. I just think he's a really good defensive mind. Maybe what happened last year when it just fell off the table made their talent look a little bit worse than it actually is, because they've got some players. Charles Wright is a good pass rusher from the outside spot. Dayo Odeyingbo, I think it's actually Odengbo, he's changed the pronunciation of his name this year. He and his brother Dare are solid players, but Dayo is a really good 6'5", 6'6" defensive end off the edge. He's about 270. He's pretty athletic. He's capable of making some plays. I want to see what those guys do again and get some more talented athletic team, because I think they have some parts. The question now is, was it really as bad as it looked last year, or was the truth somewhere kind of in the middle of where they started and where they ended up? And again, I think that'll be a good test.
Kind of reminded me of, I don't know if you remember, if you followed it at all, because I know you're so deep in the SEC country, but when Northwestern was 4-0, and game day came to town, and then Ohio State came to town and beat them, and then they didn't win a game the rest of the year. I mean, it was a good team, and they had pieces, but it was just like after that, it was like it just killed their will, kind of how Alabama, won 59-0 and just kind of really killed momentum, any kind of momentum Vandy had last year.
Yeah, last year was the strangest year because, again, they had made progress at the end of the season. I mean, they beat a Tennessee team that had a lot of players. They had Alvin Kamara. They had Josh Dobbs, who I guess is on a pro roster somewhere. He's not playing, but he's a second or third string quarterback for somebody. And Tennessee had some players, and Vanderbilt rang up 600 yards on those guys to end 2016 in the regular season, and it just beaten Ole Miss like a drum. The week after, Ole Miss went into Texas A&M with Shea Patterson and beat those guys. So it was kind of like you thought you knew where things were headed. I had gone to fall camp to a lot of practices, and I didn't think their defense was going to be really good at all. I thought, I was really concerned about it. Then 3 games into the year, they're leading the country in total defense, and I don't know what to make of them. And then it just all goes haywire. And then it gives them more points than anybody in the history of the SEC. So you've got 1 minute you think you know where it's going at the end of 2016, then 2017 starts, and they just come out like a house on fire on defense, and then it just all goes really bad, and then it starts and they play great to start this year. And by the way, they have forced 6 turnovers in 2 games, and they only forced 9 all year last year. So they're just mixed signals all over the place, and I know that some of it's level of competition, but I just think a lot of us are just kind of sitting around going, okay, what really comes next? Because this has gone so many different directions for them on defense over the course of the last 16, 17 games. We're still all waiting to see what they've got.
Yeah, it should be interesting. They've got all those takeaways, and they've got almost 10 sacks on the year so far too, especially with losing Orion Burks, who's now playing with the Packers. Who's the other guy? Who's somebody on defense who you think is going to be the person to step up and take over this defense?
Probably Charles Wright, who's their outside linebacker, who's preseason, I think, second team All-SEC. He had 9 sacks a year ago. I think 8 of those came out of conference. but he also played hurt last year a lot. And I think that depressed his numbers because I think that injury coincided with SEC play. He got, according to Pro Football Focus, the highest grade they had on defense in week 1. I haven't seen week 2's grades yet. And he didn't really have a particularly outstanding game statistically, but I think he gets double teamed a lot because people are concerned about him. I think he's a guy, I think Juwan Williams, their corner, who's a big 6'3", 210-pound kid who really doesn't get beat very often, is a really talented player. Got his first interception of his career on Saturday. Those are two guys. I think the Odengbo kid, Dio, is pretty talented. And they've got a pretty nice collection of inside linebackers, but I think they split reps enough there where nobody stands out. But those are the guys that I would probably keep an eye on.
Now on defense, and you mentioned Tarver, the defensive coordinator. Is he the one that I heard he lived with Derek Mason or above his apartment or something like that when he first got to town? That's pretty funny.
Yeah, he was. I think he lived with the Masons for about 3 weeks, and they talk about how they're brothers, and the players talk about how they kind of read each other's mind and everything. I think they're two guys that are really advanced defensive minds, and I bet there was at least 1 or 2 conversations where those guys were up to the wee hours of morning just talking defense, because you pull either of them aside and get them started. It's obviously that they both have a passion for what they do, and I think they're a really good fit together. And I think Jason Tarver's presence allows Derek Mason to do a lot of things that he needed to do. Because honestly, guys, when it fell apart for them last year, a lot of the details started getting lost too. And I think Derek having to wear the head coach and the defensive coordinator hat, that made it harder to fix stuff. So I think that his presence is probably underrated just because it frees Derek up to do some more things as well.
Now, Chris, is there one position group that you have more confidence in than any of the rest?
Yeah, I probably like their running backs as a whole. I'm a little concerned because I thought they'd be really good. I'm a little concerned that they have not dominated the teams that they have played so far to a greater extent. I don't know if that is that the talent's not as good as maybe as I thought it was, or if the play calling at times has been so predictable that it negates their efficiency. I think that's one that I like, but I've been pleasantly surprised by their receivers group. Again, I think Lipscomb's a good player. The tight end Pinckney's a talented one. And they've got some younger kids in Cam Johnson. I don't know if they'll play Amir Abdul-Rahman or not, but he's a big freshman who's just physically gifted and smooth, and I think he'll help them at some point. That position was kind of an area of concern for me, but they really showed out in fall camp, and I think were a pleasant surprise. So that's kind of the one that I'm watching too, because I think they've got some untapped potential there that hasn't yet shown on the stat sheet.
So Turner Cockrell, he's got cancer is what it looks like. How is that affecting the team? Are they rallying around him, or is it motivation for the team?
It's hard to say. They're a somewhat private group. I got to know Turner just a little bit. I happened to be at a dinner a couple years back that he was sitting next to me at, and just a really bright, good-natured, intelligent, pleasant kid. And we didn't see him much last fall, and we didn't see him at all in the spring. And I knew there was an injury situation, but I didn't know what it was. And the point that I'm getting at, kind of back to your question, is it seems like they've rallied around him, but that was such a private news item. We didn't know about it till a month, or really till last week. So it's hard to say because they seem to keep their business to themselves. But based on what we've seen in videos and things like that, obviously he's a kid who's beloved by his teammates. They've got a pretty good culture around that program that I think that's a tight-knit group of players. And I can't help but think if you go through something like that, it serves as sort of a bonding experience for the whole team. You hate that it happens under those circumstances, but it does – from what I can tell, it seems to have brought them a little closer to each other.
Yeah, we watched. I seen after the. I think it was the middle game. He was going to go and get treatment the next day. Went in Houston, and Coach Mason gave him the game ball. Pretty cool stuff, that's for sure. So Chris, we'll get you out of here on this one. Quick question, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Vanderbilt wins this game if what?
If they force turnovers, if they don't turn the ball over, and if they're able to take some chances and maybe connect on a couple of deep balls that they're capable of connecting on. They've talked about explosive plays and the ability to generate those. Again, when push comes to shove, so far they've pulled those out of their bag of tricks kind of when they had to. I'm anxious to see if they'll take a more aggressive approach, and if they can make a couple plays and not force and not make turnovers, and maybe force a couple as they have so far, maybe it's a little bit better game than most of us think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate you coming on with us, Chris. Chris, are you going to be at the game this week?
Unfortunately, I probably won't be able to make it. I've got a couple other freelance jobs that are just knocking me out right now.
Yeah.
So I probably won't, but I hate it because, man, that's a road trip of a lifetime that I've always hoped to make, but just with family obligations and some other things like that, I'll probably watch from TV. But maybe there'll be a last-minute change of heart, because if I can make that trip, that's one that's been on the bucket list for a long time.
Yeah, and then I kind of looked future schedules. It doesn't look like we're on each other's schedule. It kind of surprised me that we're not doing a home-and-home with this, or even playing maybe at the Titans Stadium. That really kind of surprised me that didn't happen. But it is cool that these two programs are getting to lock up, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think this came out of there was supposed to be a game, I believe, in Rome that James Franklin was talking about. I remember hearing about it in 2014. I don't know where it went from there. It kind of went quiet, and I guess somehow it ended up being in South Bend. But I think the genesis of it was somewhere in there.
Huh. Interesting. That is definitely interesting. Well, if there is any last-minute changes, me and my wife, we're leaving on Wednesday morning, so we'll be there Wednesday to Sunday. So let me know, and we'll sync up, maybe have lunch, something like that, meet up, talk a little trash to each other. So
would love to do that if I can make it.
Absolutely. And we'll check back up on you again at some point. I loved having you on. I definitely love having your perspective. I listened to since I found you, and you do the podcast as well. I've been listening to most episodes you have on. They're pretty good stuff. I recommend every time I tweet something out or I see put a new show up, I try to get it retweeted for you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I've been are you familiar with Chris Dortch's Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook?
I've heard of it. I know of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's about a 650,000 word preview, and I'm his main editor on that this year.
Jeez.
Whoa.
So I'm, in addition to running that site and doing a little bit of high school football coverage on Fridays, I say a little bit, it keeps me occupied from about 6 to midnight on Fridays. I'm doing about 60 or 70 hours a week right now for Chris with Blue Ribbon, and as we've got I think we try to go to the printer about a week from now, so it just is. It's just killing me.
Yeah, we're kind of cracking up right now because we signed on with a local high school, North Catholic. It's one of the actually in Central Ohio and even Ohio overall. They're one of the premier, football brands, if you will. They have 8 state titles, which is like second most. And we were fortunate enough to when they got a new coach this year, and we had him on, and we did this coaches spotlight thing with some high school coaches, and developed a really good relationship with them. And we actually do coverage every Friday night now. We're doing Twitter updates. We're doing pictures. Will, my co-host here, he's a photographer on the side. We do the halftime interview. We do post-game interview. And actually, right before we had you on, we did his post-game show because they had a game last night. So, yeah, I get it.
And then back at it the next day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but it's a fun job, isn't it?
Yeah, well, last year I was they had me. I would sometimes it's kind of a desk job where I will read box scores when they come in and just do staff report kinds of articles. And I was doing sometimes 18 games at once. And when it really hit its apex, there was 1 or 2 weeks I was up till 2 or 3 in the morning, and once or twice those coincided with 11 o'clock SEC kickoffs at Vandy the next day.
Oof.
So those were just the ones that I was just like, holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that's
This is
a
a
rough.
lot.
Yeah, that's a rough. Well, that's what I did last night after the North Catholic Columbus Academy game. We go to B Dubs, me and my team. We break down the game, and then I come home, and then I watched, tried to finish up your game, and then I tried to finish up whatever Notre Dame was calling that debacle against Ball State. Tried to finish that up. So then
Yeah.
I'm a nurse. My full time job is I'm actually a nurse, and then I'm right back at work tomorrow after we get this all
Oh
uploaded.
goodness.
Yeah, so that's good times.
Well, I used to do. I was a VP in higher ed for a while, and had been in that for about 17 years, and lost the job just out of the blue one day. But I did this. I started the site in '03 and did it part time. And the Vanderbilt's market is just not. It's not big enough to have a subscription based site that you can really, make a ton of money with. So that's why I'm doing all the other freelance stuff. But their biggest booster, John Ingram, who owns the local soccer team that we're getting, the Major League Soccer team, writes me a pretty nice check for a sponsorship for the podcast. And when I lost my job, I actually went into radio for a bit, and I started a post-game call-in show for Vanderbilt that they'd never had, and left the station a few years ago, and he just agreed to pick it back up as a podcast. But long story to say that I did this I did it part-time for 8 years, and I lost the job, and I just said screw it, because I used to always sit at my desk and just think, man, there's a press conference today that I'd love to be at, or I just always dreamed in my mind, like, man, if I could just do this full time. So I was able to cobble together enough options, enough things to outside of Vanderbilt to do it. But man, it's all consuming at times.
Mm-hmm. Definitely is.
So I understand the road that you guys are going down, because that's my life a lot of times too, just wearing a lot of hats, and sometimes the sleep suffers a bit.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one thing with it not being your job, I always tell people it's not my full-time job. It's nice, it's fun, but when it stops becoming fun at this stage, I kind of take a step back a little bit. Because it is, at this point, it's still just a hobby, kind of a side thing. So we definitely, once it starts getting a little like, okay, this is too much work, or we're not having fun, we do take a step back a little bit.
No, and that's really good. I did that because when I did this part time the first couple years, I got so obsessed with it that I stepped away from it for about 5 or 6 months, and I had the intention of quitting. And a buddy of mine pulled me aside. He's like, "Look, your life might have got out of balance, but I think you would be making a mistake to quit." And he was right. I got back into it, but the thing that I learned in just taking the time off is, like, there was stuff that I like to do, like watch movies and things like that. It's like, man, I'm not doing that at all right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it got to be where I was like, okay, I think if it ever becomes too much again, it'll take care of itself, because that taught me some balance that I didn't have at the time. And really ever since then, other than like the rut I'm in now with having to edit the book and everything, which just can't be helped. It's a seasonal thing because we've got a print deadline. But that kind of is taking care of itself, because I'm the same way. When it starts to be like, this isn't enjoyable anymore, I take a step back. But my wife is a nurse. She's an NP. But if you ever decide to make the switch, let me know. I'll be happy to tell you the pitfalls and what you've got to do to make it full time, because it is work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely finding that out. But right now, everybody, all the guests we've had we had Allison Hayes on, and then we had the Notre Dame soccer coach came on with us, and Katie Myers, the Notre Dame social media director, and all these local high school coaches. They love coming on. So we're getting to the point now where at one time I was like, oh, I just want to get a guest, and then we're getting to the point where it's like we've been turning people down actually a few times.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
So that's good stuff. And then we got the backing of the Notre Dame fan club here in Columbus, and the alumni group, and Dempsey's is our sponsor, which is where the alumni meets for game watch parties and stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Well, you guys asked good questions. I could tell you did your homework, so
yeah.
That's a big part of it too. I mean, I'm on so many shows where I just get these questions that I'm like, somebody just Googled that, 15 seconds
That's
before
funny.
they called me. So,
yeah.
and which I don't mind. It's exposure, and you in the business, you try to help people out, but I could tell you guys do your homework.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, we're avid college football fans anyway. I could probably do this with about anybody down to the Sun Belt. So yours is a little different though, because I like I said before, I have a lot of respect for Vandy. I really enjoy the basketball team, and here lately, I love Derek Mason. So I'm really hoping for some success for him. So I've been following the team a little more in my periphery. The Notre Dame stuff gets a little hectic at times, but yeah, even just as a fan, as you can tell.
Well, basketball is going to be interesting. They just signed the first 2 McDonald's All-Americans in the history of the school this year.
Oh,
They're
wow.
both coming in as freshmen. And then they got Matt Ryan from Notre Dame, who did really well in practices this last year, from what I'm told. So.
Very cool. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on with us. Hopefully we can do this again at some point. And if you do decide to make the trip, you got my number. Go ahead and text me, call me, whatever. We'll link up while up in South Bend.
Yeah, I will absolutely do that. If there's a change of direction here and I go up there, which I wouldn't totally rule out, but my wife would probably kill me if I did. So.
Yeah, I understand that. So, Chris, you have a great rest of your evening, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, if I can ever help you guys, just let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Have
Thank
a good
you.
one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, that was our cross-promotional show with VandySports.com's Chris Lee. Man, awesome guy. What'd you think?
Yeah.
Totally knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Really cool interview. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I did find it's at Chris Lee 70 is his personal Twitter page, and then it's at VandySports.com is he doesn't really do much with his personal Twitter page, or hasn't in a while. So if you guys want to check out most of his stuff and then his other editors and this and that with VandySports.com. So Will's got a daughter's birthday to get to. He was gracious enough to give me all this time. I tried to say 6:30, but you had to have known that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
We were going to do some where we were right, where we were wrong. That's kind of some stuff we'll be doing later in the season because we've been wrong on a lot looking back. And we got a lot of other stuff coming up. No show next week. I'm taking a week off. I'll be in South Bend for the game, as you heard. I'll put some stuff on the page. I'll go live a few times. Like I said, we're gonna meet. Me and Ashley, my wife, we're gonna meet up with pretty much everybody that's been on the show while we're up there. We'll maybe get a quick couple questions in, kind of go live or something cool like that, or I don't know. We'll see where my motivation level is. We haven't been away from my son one night since he's been here in 10 months. Who knows how many times my phone actually comes out? So
Yeah.
So real quick, Will, last thing, we'll get you to your family, I promise. You got a prediction for this Notre Dame-Vandy game, the score prediction?
No, I don't have a score prediction because I feel like I've been so far off. So I'm going to say it's like 4-3.
4-3. I like
Yeah.
it. In the bottom of the ninth. Right?
Yeah, right. It's going to be a walk-off.
Yeah, we'll be a walk-off. I think Notre Dame bounces back next weekend. I think they better. Yeah, that Ball State mess was a disaster. I do think it was a little pre-planned. I think they tried to keep Wimbush in the pocket. The percentage was good at 17-31, but he also threw 3 passes to the wrong team. Maybe he's colorblind. I don't know. But it just seemed like that Kelly had a plan to keep him in the pocket. I'd love to ask somebody in the know if that was the plan. Kelly probably would never say that. But, yeah, so I would love to see if that was the plan. We're going to make you a pocket passer today. And if not, then we can get away with it because it's Ball State.
Yeah, it almost gives you the feeling that they were trying to be too vanilla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the big knock on Wimbush is his throwing and not being consistent. And there's times that there's just a field wide open, and he just wouldn't run. He's trying to squeeze it in there, and then like the play you saw to Claypool on the sideline where he's wide open, but it's got to be this miraculous highlight reel catch. And then I know I'll have to go back and rewatch the game. I actually haven't finished it yet because of our North Catholic coverage, but Flutie and all his wonder up there in the booth said that Cole Kmet was open a couple times, and Wimbush was missing his progression on the tight end on a few of those drives. So I'll get back and look at that. But again, no show next week. This show will be loaded up on the SoundCloud, iTunes, all the usual suspects. Make sure you give us a follow on the Facebook page. We are almost at 600 follows and likes. I know, right?
Uh-oh.
I'm going to owe you and your family dinner once we hit 1,000. That was the deal.
Well, I got to go through my Facebook profiles because I think I have like 500 of them.
Okay.
And that's like 500 of our likes.
Oh, I gotcha.
So.
Yeah, well, there's that. And then my mom, she's probably created 3 or 4 profiles to like
yeah.
us. So shout out to Jason and Nate, those leprechauns out there. Remember, our show is brought to you by Dempsey's Food and Spirits, 346 South High Street in Columbus. Show's back in 2 weeks. The Ryan ILO postgame show will be on, and I don't know how I keep forgetting this, the 23rd, 5 o'clock. And then we'll be back at it pretty much right after that. I don't even want to put a number on it. We'll just get right back at it with the East of the Bend podcast. But until then, go Irish.